this is Somewhere for Us. A brand new LGBTQ+ arts, culture, heritage and enterprise podcast for Scotland and beyond. I'm your host, Jules Stapleton Barnes, and I'm a queer woman in flat shoes and a comfortable bra. We're celebrating and championing queer life in Scotland, with or without the labels. I'll be bringing guests from page to podcast alongside our brilliant quarterly print and online magazine, also named Somewhere for Us, so you can get even closer to the content we feature. Hi, I'm Jules Stapleton Barnes, presenter and producer of the Somewhere for Us podcast. Today, I'm going to share with you some thoughts about why I love audio. Oh, that's better. I've just turned the camera off to tell you why I love audio so much. It's practical. I can engage with audio and do other things. I can walk a dog. I can go for a run. I can wash up. I don't have to put my life on hold to consume the audio. It can come with me. It can be a private or a shared experience. If I want it to be just for me, it can be. And because I love stories. It's how I can find my community. It's how I can relate, feel like I'm not alone. Okay, let's bring it back in. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to share some of my experience of recording and producing audio and the production process and some tips that have helped me along the way. I'm going to share a couple of epic fails and some of the pitfalls and the things that help us do it better next time. I am by no means an expert, and I'll leave most of the technical aspects of producing a podcast for another masterclass. But what I'm here for is to share my passion for audio and the power it has to invite us into the lives of people that deserve to be heard. So a little bit about my journey with audio and with radio and podcasts. I studied radio drama and broadcasting in Stirling University, but the tech has changed quite a bit since then, since the late 90s. And the industry has changed beyond recognition too. I've done a bit of community and local commercial work. And on reflection, I don't think I was showing up to these jobs as my whole self. It didn't always feel so comfortable to do so. I wasn't out as a queer woman. And although I think I technically came across well, I wonder how that impacted the potential for me to really reach and connect with an audience. One of my first interviews was at a commercial radio station for a presenting gig for a station that shall remain nameless. And the program director asked me, "Who are you really? Who are you?" I didn't really know how to answer that because I didn't trust that he would be okay with the answer. If you're planning to host a podcast, I'm not going to include be yourself as a top tip because I think there's lots of factors that influence how possible that is for you. However, I do want to emphasize the sheer joy I found through hosting a queer podcast, creating authentic audio and being able to hear and share my identity through that process. Somewhere for Us is also a magazine, print format, packed full of inspiring queer stories and content from right across Scotland. I love it too. And I love that it makes our stories more accessible in a different way to audio. But for me, there's a sensory experience that helps me connect in a deeper, more personal way when I hear music, sounds, and words that help to tell those stories. Podcasting has exploded in popularity over the last decade. It's accessible to a wide audience, it's low tech, it's somewhat affordable. And for me personally, as someone who mostly listens through headphones whilst I'm moving around the world, getting from A to B, audio is comforting. It's company. It's a window into a world outside of my own. I want to be a fly on the wall sometimes, but I also want to feel like I'm part of the conversation, which is about how I can relate to what I'm hearing. There are lots of different formats for podcasting. non-fictional storytelling, fictional storytelling, co-hosting, documentary style, panel discussions. There's so many different ways to do it. But with the Somewhere for Us podcast in mind, I'm going to focus on the conversational interview format that I've been experimenting with so far with this podcast. And I've come up with some top tips that are helping towards my goals to work with audio that creates connection, that makes queer content accessible, even to those who need to access it discreetly, that ensures queer voices are championed and our stories are archived.
And I suddenly heard these three men talking about Tales of the City. And I thought to myself, what if they're gay? This might be the first time I've ever met a gay person.
So these next 5 top tips come from my experience as a presenter and producer of the Somewhere for Us podcast. And as a host, the place that my heart goes to first is the guests. So top tip number 1, get to know your guests. The people who are giving up their time, often emotional resource, to have a recorded chat with a host that they may have never met before. I feel quite responsible about the guest, about learning about the guest. And although it's not always possible to read and consume everything they've ever done, I take a look at their most recent work or involvements and get a sense of what they're all about now. I like to look in the past to see what they've done. And I like to watch how other people have interviewed them and how they've been in interviews. It'll give you an opportunity to learn about their conversational style, how their voice sounds, the kind of energy they bring, the things that make them excited and bring them to life in an interview. You'll get a sense of the themes they want to explore too. And I ask myself, what makes me smile about them? Like, what interests me in the way that they sound? And how can I get them sounding like that? So preparation is vital for recording any kind of audio.
Tip 1, get to know your guest.
Planning your interview or your conversation, having accessible notes in front of you is particularly important if you want your conversation to feel relevant and relatable to your audience. Send your guest the conversation themes ahead of time so that they can review and consider the things that they might say. They can also keep you informed of any topics that are off the table. That's really important if they are going to feel comfortable and if they trust you in the situation. I love it when we're spontaneous in conversations in a podcast, but I'm also aware that I want my guests to feel comfortable. And if they're sharing personal stories, then I found that a conversation plan helps with this so they can prepare a little bit and they know what to expect. Something to be mindful of before inviting a guest to take part is not everyone who is entertaining on camera or in person is as entertaining or accessible when it's just audio. Recording audio is sometimes out of people's comfort zone, and that does come across and can create barriers between the listener and the conversation, which could limit the time they spend listening or how invested they feel. Top tip number 2, check your tech. Always check your tech. It sounds obvious, but it still scuppers me from time to time, and it's so easy to get simple things wrong. It will affect the quality of the audio that you're capturing. And I want to feel relaxed and happy that the tech is sorted so that I can focus on my guest. It's sometimes tricky, depending on the environment that you're in and what you have to work with. Make time if you can. Make time, lots of time if you have it, to check your tech and your setup. Test your equipment and your software and hear how the space sounds. Big echoey spaces without much soft furnishings are awful for recording. So you also need to consider the kind of space that is possible for you and your guest. It doesn't have to be perfect, but do what you can with what you've got. Also, extra top tip is make sure the space is warm enough to relax into the conversation. If people are feeling cold, then they sound cold. Provide water or warm drinks for yourself and your guest if you can. Keep spare batteries and cables for those unexpected moments. I once interviewed Gokwan in the back of a new look shop somewhere many years ago, and my batteries failed on one of the machines I was using. And on the other machine, the only machine I could use, a cable made a crackling sound all the way through. He was honest and caring and very cheeky. And personally, I thought we were going to be best friends for the rest of our life. But I couldn't use any of the interview and the chat was useless. So, Doc, if you're out there, let's do it again. But it was very frustrating. And because I didn't check and I didn't prepare enough. So make time, check everything and keep spares. Top tip number 3, pause and review. Pause and review. This is something I have learned the hard way because I felt so frustrated when a guest has gone and there's no other opportunity without a lot of embarrassment to capture the conversation that I wanted to have or that I feel other people might want to hear. Don't be afraid to pause and review in the middle of your recording. You can edit. Pauses are fine. Keep your guest informed of what you're doing. Check your notes. Let them know why you've stopped, that you can take a break, that they can take a break, can move around, create some space for you to revisit your notes and get yourself back on track. I did it recently with the Outlander actor John Bell, because he and I were taking the conversation off to some wild places in all sorts of fun directions, which is really fun. And I was enjoying myself a lot. But having gained permission from him earlier, I knew I wanted to hear him telling his coming out story, which would bring a more sincere tone to the chat and offer listeners going through something similar a chance to connect with feelings of hope and affirmation. I almost forgot to ask about it, but the pause and review moment helped me keep on track.
Through my career, I'd worked with so many inspirational gay men that very quickly those feelings dissipated as I saw that you can be happy and successful and loved as an openly gay person.
Top tip number 4, listen and be present. This might sound a bit daft, but I still very much need to remind myself as a host to listen and be present. You are in the conversation too, and your reactions and your follow-up questions and the empathy you want to authentically bring to the conversation are really important. People can hear it. Be careful, because it's not possible to be authentic in that conversation if you're not really listening. And if you're worrying about tech or the weather or the post-production or your cat, make sure you're physically comfortable and relaxed. I drop my shoulders. Not quite like that, but I drop my shoulders and I take a deep breath. I also sometimes touch my notes in front of me. I touch something at the table sometimes, just to steady myself, ground myself, and remind myself why I'm there and what I'm doing. Because you can get carried away in over an hour of recording sometimes. It can be quite tiring, actually. So remember that you can pause the conversation. You can re-energize yourself. And if there's anything distracting you, the guest will appreciate you taking the time to be present for them and sorting it out. So after the guest has gone, and hopefully you're feeling really excited and happy with the audio that you've got, if you're anything like me, you're going to want a whole hunk of uninterrupted time to do the edit. It is one of my favorite things to do. I absolutely love losing myself in an edit, to listen intently to the audio I have, but this time as an audience member. So not as host, but as somebody who is dropping in on the conversation and wants to be a part of it. I'm going to leave the editing masterclass to someone else, but my final top tip is top tip number 5. Don't over edit. Don't over egg that custard. If you love it, like I do, it becomes a bit of an obsession and it's easy to forget the purpose of the audio, which for me and the Somewhere For Us podcast is about the senses that it evokes, the sense of belonging, the sense of community. I feel understood sometimes when I'm listening to a conversation that I feel relates to me. I feel excited to be part of something simply through the stories shared by others. So that's a few tips that have helped me make the most of the audio that I've worked with so far. I'm excited to explore lots of different formats too in the future. So if you'd like to collaborate, you've got any ideas, I would love to hear from you. And my contact details will pop up on the screen at the end. If nothing else, I hope that you feel excited to give something a go. Present, produce, edit, enjoy it, and make mistakes, because that's how we learn. And I'm still making them, and I'm still learning, and I still love it. And you can give Somewhere For Us podcast a listen over at somewhereforus.org/podcast. You can follow me on socials, find me on Instagram, which is somewhereforus_podcast. And you can find us on Apple and Spotify. And I'd love your feedback. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you want for next time. So let's connect. I'm Jules Stapleton Barnes, and thank you for listening.
So let's recap. Top tip number 1, get to know your guest. Take time to learn about their work. Watch, listen to other interviews. Provide them with a brief conversation plan. Top tip number 2, check your tech. Make sure you create enough time for setup and test everything. Keep spare batteries and have some cables to hand. Top tip number 3, pause and review. Don't be afraid to pause the chat. Check your notes. Ask open questions. Ask your guest for more. Top tip number 4, listen and be present. It's really easy to drift off and focus on tech. Your reactions and your questions can be engaging too. Make sure you are physically comfortable as well as the guest. And top tip number 5, don't over-edit. It's really easy to be faffing about and lose the natural flow of the conversation. Start the process by reminding yourself of the key parts of the conversation that you loved and are excited to share. And that's it from me. For more information on the Somewhere For Us magazine and podcast, visit somewhereforus.org.